The fearless alien general dominated the battlefield, until she met someone who broke her heart. Frost and Fire Commander Lyria Nix moved through the smoke-filled corridors of the human research station. With practiced precision, her crystalline blade humming softly at her side, the purple luminescence of her skin cast eerie shadows on the walls as emergency lights flickered overhead. Behind her, 3 Asterian soldiers secured each section with methodical efficiency. Life signs detected in the East Wing Laboratory, Commander, her second-in-command reported through the neural link. 1 human remains. Lyria's violet eyes narrowed. Proceed with caution. The last researcher had explosives. The memory of losing 2 soldiers in the previous raid still burned fresh. Humans were deceptively resourceful despite their fragile appearance. The laboratory doors yielded easily to her override codes. Inside, a lone figure hunched over a specimen container, seemingly oblivious to the alarms blaring throughout the station. Hands visible. Human, Lyria commanded, her translator converting her native clicks and hums into standard galactic English. Move away from whatever weapon you're concealing. The human turned slowly, revealing not fear but exhaustion in his deep-set brown eyes. He wore simple clothing stained with soil and plant matter, not the typical military-grade protection of Coalition scientists. It's not a weapon, he said softly. It's a seedling, the last of its kind after your bombardment of the Epsilon colony. Lyria approached cautiously, blade raised. You have 5 seconds to surrender before I remove your ability to resist. The man carefully placed the container on a cooling unit and raised his hands. Ellis Thorne, botanical researcher. I'm unarmed. Botanical? Lyria's mandibles clicked with skepticism. The Coalition doesn't waste resources on plants during wartime. Ellis's gaze remained steady. Shows what you know about war, Commander. Sometimes the most effective weapons don't look like weapons at all. Something about his calm demeanor unsettled her. Most humans cowered or attacked when cornered. This one merely watched her with a scientist's analytical gaze. Search him, she ordered her soldiers. Then secure any research data. As her team began dismantling the lab's systems, Lyria felt a strange tingling sensation creep up her arm. Looking down, she noticed a fine yellow powder coating her exposed wrist where her armor didn't quite meet her glove. The sensation rapidly transformed into burning pain. What is this? She demanded, suddenly dizzy. The room tilted dangerously. Ellis Thorne's expression shifted from resignation to alarm. Pollen from the Vashta orchid, highly toxic to silicon-based lifeforms. He moved toward her despite the weapons trained on him. I can help, but your soldiers need to let me access my supplies. Stand back, shouted her second Krell, training his weapon on the human's chest. Lyria's vision blurred as she tried to remain standing. If he wanted me dead, he wouldn't warn me. She managed through mandibles that were quickly going numb. Ellis moved with surprising efficiency, mixing substances from various containers. This will hurt, he warned before pressing a paste against her exposed wrist. The pain was immediate and blinding. When Lyria regained full consciousness hours later, she found herself aboard her command vessel, the human botanist confined to a holding cell nearby. According to her medical officer, the antidote had saved her life with mere minutes to spare. Bring him to me, she ordered, sitting upright despite her body's protest. Ellis entered her quarters flanked by guards, his expression unreadable. The paralysis should be completely gone within 48 hours, he said, clinical and detached. You saved my life, Lyria stated. After I destroyed your research facility. I'm a healer first. Even when it comes to those who've made themselves my enemies. Lyria studied him carefully. The Coalition has weaponized botanical specimens against my people for decades. Why should I believe you're merely a researcher? Because I'm still alive, Ellis replied simply. If I were developing bioweapons, your intelligence would have identified me long ago. Something, in his straightforward logic, resonated with Lyria. Her instincts, honed through countless battles, detected no deception. You will assist our medical team in understanding this toxin, she decided. Cooperate and you'll be treated as a specialist rather than a prisoner. Ellis's gaze drifted to the viewport where the stars stretched into streaks as the ship accelerated to hyperspace. It seems I don't have much choice. No, Lyria agreed, watching this unusual human with newfound curiosity. You don't. Seeds of Trust, the Asterian battlecruiser Adamant Will hummed with efficiency as it cut through the darkness between stars. Commander Lyria Nix stood watching the human work in the converted laboratory space, her posture rigid despite the lingering effects of the toxin. Ellis Thorne moved with quiet purpose among the specimens he'd been permitted to salvage from the research station, his hands steady as he measured, mixed, and documented. "You're staring again." "Commander?" Ellis noted without looking up from his microscope. "If you have questions, you could simply ask them." Lyria's mandibles clicked once in annoyance. "Your work." "Explain it." Ellis adjusted the focus on his equipment. "I'm cataloging botanical defense mechanisms that might be harmful to Asterian physiology. The incident with the Vashta pollen wasn't an isolated risk." He finally turned to face her. "Your raids have been increasingly targeting agricultural and ecological research facilities. Your soldiers are encountering plants they've never been exposed to before." "Because your coalition is developing biological weapons," Lyria countered. Ellis sighed, running a hand through his dark, disheveled hair. "Some are, yes, but that's not what my team was doing. We were studying sustainable terraforming applications for damaged ecosystems. A convenient cover story." "Look at the molecular structures yourself," Ellis challenged, gesturing to the display. "These compounds aren't designed for weapons. They're too unstable, too unpredictable. Effective weapons require consistency." Lyria moved closer, her bioluminescent skin casting a violet glow over the workstation. She studied the complex chemical formulas with narrowed eyes. "Your species has always underestimated mine," Ellis said quietly. "You see our physical limitations and assume intellectual ones follow. But we've survived far worse than the Asterian Empire." Something in his tone, pride without arrogance, caught Lyria's attention. "You speak as though you've personally faced extinction." A shadow crossed Ellis's features. "Haven't we all in this war?" Before she could respond, the ship's alarm blared. "Commander, to the bridge," came the urgent summons through her neural link. "Continue your work." "Guards remain posted," she instructed, already moving toward the door. On the bridge, chaos awaited. Radiation surge from the nearby nebula, her tactical officer reported. 2 patrol ships caught in the wave, life support failing. "Deploy rescue vessels," Lyria ordered. "The radiation levels make approach impossible," came the response. "And it's spreading toward us." Lyria's mind raced through options, each more desperate than the last. Then a memory surfaced. Ellis's quiet confidence as he neutralized the toxin in her system. "Bring the human to the bridge," she commanded, ignoring the shocked expressions of her officers. When Ellis arrived, she gestured toward the view screen showing the approaching radiation wave. "Your expertise. Can organic compounds provide protection against this type of radiation?" Ellis studied the readings, his expression turning from confusion to concentration. "Yes," he said finally. "There's a symbiotic fungus we cultivated on Epsilon that absorbs radiation of this specific frequency. If you have the right growth medium, I could synthesize a protective coating for your rescue vessels." "You would help save Asterian lives?" Lyria asked, genuinely puzzled. "Soldiers who destroyed your research?" Ellis met her gaze steadily. "As I said before, I'm a healer first." Hours later, Lyria watched from the command deck as the coated vessels successfully retrieved the stranded patrols. Ellis stood beside her, no longer flanked by guards, a silent acknowledgement of the trust she'd been forced to place in him. "Your solution worked perfectly," she admitted. "Plants and fungi have been solving survival problems for billions of years," Ellis replied. "We just need to listen to what they're telling us." Later that night, Lyria found herself outside the quarters now assigned to Ellis, no longer a cell, but still monitored. She hesitated before announcing her presence. "Enter," his voice called from within. She found him tending to the small collection of plants he'd been allowed to keep. "These were unnecessary accommodations," she said stiffly. Ellis smiled slightly. "Yet you provided them anyway." "Efficiency," she countered. "Your productivity increases with adequate resources." "Of course," he nodded, not challenging her explanation. "Was there something you needed, Commander?" Lyria found herself uncharacteristically uncertain. "Your assistance today saved 17 of my crew. I wish to convey appropriate recognition." "Thank you would suffice," Ellis suggested, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. "Thank you," Lyria repeated, the unfamiliar words feeling strange in her mouth. Ellis regarded her curiously. "May I ask you something personal, Commander?" Lyria stiffened but nodded once. "Why do you fight this war?" Not your empire, you personally. The question caught her off guard. No one had asked her that in decades of service. Duty, she answered automatically, then frowned. Protection. The coalition threatened Asterian colonies, harvested our resources. Did they? Ellis asked quietly. Or is that what you were told? Lyria's luminescence flared with anger. You question my intelligence reports? I question everyone's, Ellis replied calmly. War thrives on controlled information. He turned back to his plants. The fungi that saved your crew today, we discovered it growing in the ruins of a battlefield where both humans and Asterians had fallen. Their decomposing bodies created the perfect environment for it to evolve, something beautiful emerging from shared destruction. Lyria stood silent, unsettled by both his words and the strange feeling taking root within her. Perhaps there's a lesson there, Ellis continued softly, about what might grow in the space between enemies. If given the chance, she left without responding, but his words followed her through the corridors of her ship, persistent as the afterimage of stars when one closes one's eyes. Blooming in darkness. Your association with the human has not gone unnoticed, Commander. High Admiral Vex's hologram towered in the communication chamber, his four eyes narrowed with suspicion. The Sovereign Council questions your judgment. Lyria maintained perfect posture, her face an expressionless mask. The human possesses valuable knowledge. His expertise has already saved Asterian lives and provided countermeasures against coalition biological threats. And yet you allow him unusual freedoms, Vex continued. He walks your ship without restraints, consults on tactical operations. Under constant surveillance, Lyria countered. Every interaction is monitored. Every specimen he handles is scanned. His value outweighs the risk. Vex leaned forward, his holographic form distorting slightly. Some whisper that the legendary Commander Nyx has been compromised. That perhaps the human used more than pollen against you. Lyria's bioluminescence pulsed with carefully controlled anger. My loyalty to the Empire remains absolute, Admiral. Question my methods if you must, but never my devotion to our cause. Prove it, Vex demanded. The research extracted from his mind would serve us just as well. The Council orders his immediate neural dissection upon your return to Asterian space. The order struck Lyria like a physical blow, though she allowed no reaction to show. As you command, Admiral. Adamant will reach the homeworld in 17 cycles. After the transmission ended, Lyria remained motionless, a storm raging beneath her composed exterior. The neural dissection would extract every piece of knowledge Ellis possessed, while destroying his mind in the process. It was a death sentence disguised as a scientific procedure. She found Ellis in the ship's arboretum, a space that had been sterile storage before his arrival. Now it flourished with carefully cultivated specimens, some providing medicines for the crew, others purifying the recycled air more efficiently than the ship's filters. Your plants thrive, she observed, watching him tend to a flowering vine with delicate purple blooms that resembled Asterian skin patterns. Ellis looked up with a smile that faltered when he saw her expression. What's wrong? Nothing that concerns you, she replied automatically, then paused. The ease with which she'd nearly lied to him was disturbing. We will reach Asteria Prime in 17 cycles. Understanding dawned in his eyes. My usefulness comes to an end. That is not... Lyria began, then stopped herself. Yes. Ellis nodded slowly, returning his attention to the plants. I suspected this was coming. No captivity, however comfortable, lasts forever. His hands remained steady as he pruned away dying leaves. What will happen to me? The question hung between them, heavy with implications. Lyria found herself unable to speak the truth, yet unwilling to offer comforting lies. I see, Ellis said softly, interpreting her silence correctly. At least tell me if my work here has made a difference. Have I saved lives on both sides? Yes, Lyria admitted. Your antitoxins are now standard issue for our ground forces. Casualty rates have decreased by 28%. Ellis's smile returned, tinged with sadness. Then it wasn't for nothing. Something cracked within Lyria's carefully maintained composure. How can you accept this fate so calmly? Where is your anger, your fear? Would they change anything? Ellis asked simply. You could attempt escape, sabotage, bargain with intelligence about coalition defenses. Ellis set down his tools and faced her fully. Is that what you want me to do, Lyria? The use of her name without rank startled her. It had been decades since anyone had addressed her so intimately. What I want is irrelevant. I disagree, Ellis said, stepping closer. I think what you want might be the most relevant thing in this moment. Lyria found herself unable to step away as he approached, something fragile and dangerous building between them. You know nothing of what I want, don't I? Ellis reached out slowly, giving her ample time to retreat, and gently touched the luminescent patterns on her forearm. I've watched you these past weeks, studied you as carefully as any specimen. I've seen how you question orders that cause needless suffering, how you protect your crew not from duty but from genuine care. His touch sent sensations cascading through her nervous system, not unlike the toxin but somehow more potent. You presume too much, she whispered, her voice lacking conviction. Perhaps, Ellis acknowledged. Or perhaps I see the person you might be when not bound by expectations and propaganda. Lyria knew she should pull away, should remind him of his place and hers. Instead, she found herself leaning closer, drawn by something she couldn't name. And what person is that? Someone capable of seeing beyond the divisions we've inherited, Ellis said softly. Someone who might wonder if there's another path besides endless war. In the artificial night of the ship's cycle, surrounded by the only growing things aboard the adamant will, Lyria made a decision that defied decades of training. She closed the remaining distance between them, her hand rising to touch Ellis's face with careful restraint, mindful of her strength compared to his human fragility. There are 17 cycles before we reach Asteria Prime, she said quietly. In that time I would know what grows in the space between enemies, as you once said. Ellis's hand covered hers, warm against her cooler skin. Even if what grows will soon be uprooted? Even then, Lyria answered, surrendering to the impossible bloom taking root in the darkness of space, knowing all the while that winter approached. Withered secrets. The command center of the adamant will had never felt so suffocating to Lyria. 12 cycles had passed since her conversation with Ellis in the Arboretum, 12 cycles of stolen moments and growing uncertainty. Now, as she stared at the intelligence report on her screen, everything threatened to collapse. Verify this information, she ordered her intelligence officer, keeping her voice steady despite the turmoil within. Already confirmed through 3 independent sources, Commander, came the reply. The botanical research from Epsilon Colony was indeed weaponized against our forces on Deneb IV. The airborne pathogen that claimed over 200 Asterian lives originated from specimens developed by the Humans Research Team. Lyria dismissed her officers with a gesture, needing solitude to process this revelation. The evidence was undeniable. Ellis's work, or at least aspects of it, had been turned against her people. Whether he had known or participated willingly remained unclear, but the connection existed nonetheless. She found him in his quarters, absorbed in documenting the properties of a newly cultivated hybrid. He looked up with a smile that faded when he saw her expression. "What's happened?" he asked, setting aside his work. Lyria activated the display on the wall, projecting images of Asterian soldiers suffering from respiratory failure, their normally luminescent skin dull and mottled. Deneb IV, 3 stellar cycles ago. Ellis's face drained of color as he recognized the symptoms. The Pterillium extract, he whispered. They weaponized it, they? Lyria's voice was dangerously soft. Or you? No. Ellis stood abruptly. That research was meant for treating pulmonary infections. I specifically designed it to be incompatible with aerosol deployment because I feared potential military applications. His eyes showed genuine horror as he studied the images. Someone modified my work. A convenient claim, Lyria said, though a part of her wanted desperately to believe him. You know me, Lyria, Ellis pleaded, reaching for her hand. You've seen my work, my methods. Would I create something meant to cause this kind of suffering? She pulled away, her duty warring with her heart. What I know is that 200 of my people died in agony. What I know is that their deaths trace back to your research. Then execute me now if you believe I'm guilty, Ellis challenged, pain evident in his eyes. But don't pretend this is about justice when we both know it's about fear. Your fear of trusting what's grown between us. His words struck too close to the truth. Lyria turned away, unable to face him. You will remain confined to quarters until we reach Asteria Prime. The Sovereign Council will determine your fate. And what about your fate, Lyria? Ellis asked softly. Will you ever break free of the prison they've built around your mind? She left without answering, her luminescence dimmed with the weight of her choice. That night, unable to find rest, Lyria accessed the secure archives, searching through Ellis's confiscated research. Hours passed as she analyzed his original formulas, comparing them to the weaponized version deployed on Deneb IV. By morning, she had her answer. Ellis had spoken the truth. The differences were subtle but significant, changes made after his work left his hands. As she sat contemplating this revelation, her second-in-command entered with news that shattered what remained of her certainty. Priority communication from High Command, Krell reported. The Sovereign Council has accelerated the timeline. A special operations vessel will rendezvous with us in 6 hours to take custody of the human. They've sent a specialist in neural extraction. On whose authority? Lyria demanded Admiral Vex personally. He cites concerns about your objectivity regarding the prisoner. The implications were clear. She was being removed from the equation. Whatever happened to Ellis would occur beyond her influence or knowledge. The thought sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the ship's temperature. Understood. Prepare for the rendezvous, she ordered, her decision already crystallizing in her mind. 4 hours later, as the Special Ops vessel approached, alarms blared throughout the Adamant Will. Containment breach in the medical lab, reported the security officer. Some kind of airborne irritant in the ventilation system. While the crew scrambled to respond, Lyria moved swiftly through empty corridors toward Ellis's quarters. She found him waiting as though he'd known she would come. We have minutes, not hours, she said without preamble, overriding the lock on his door. A ship is coming to take you for immediate neural dissection. Ellis's eyes widened. And you're here because your research was altered after it left your possession, Lyria answered. Because I cannot allow an innocent to suffer for political expediency. And because... She hesitated, then finished with simple honesty, because what has grown between us deserves a chance to survive. She led him through maintenance passages toward the auxiliary shuttle bay. The distraction in the ventilation system will buy us time, but not much. You planned this, Ellis realized. You'll be declared a traitor. Only if they catch us, Lyria replied, her mandibles clicking with grim determination. They reached the shuttle bay unchallenged, but as Ellis boarded the small vessel, Lyria remained outside. Coordinates for a neutral outpost are already programmed. You'll find sympathetic contacts there. Ellis stared at her in confusion. You're not coming? I cannot, Lyria explained. If we both disappear, the pursuit will be relentless. If I remain, I can misdirect, create confusion, perhaps even find evidence of who truly weaponized your research. They'll punish you, Ellis protested. Not if I maintain plausible deniability. A security breach, an oversight. Nothing that can be directly traced to deliberate action on my part. Her luminescence brightened briefly as she reached out to touch his face one last time. We each have our battles to fight, Ellis Thorne. He caught her hand, holding it against his cheek. This isn't goodbye. I will find a way to prove what really happened on Deneb IV. Do not risk your freedom for vindication, Lyria warned. Live, continue your work. That will be victory enough. The sound of approaching security forces echoed through the corridor. Go, Lyria urged, stepping back as the shuttle doors began to close. I will find you again, Ellis promised, his eyes never leaving hers until the doors sealed between them. Lyria watched the shuttle launch, her expression betraying nothing as her security team burst into the bay moments too late. As she turned to face the consequences of her choice, she felt something unfamiliar, a sense of peace amidst the chaos. For the first time in her long military career, Commander Lyria Nix had followed not orders but the truth written in her own heart. Rebirth among stars 342 days. Lyria marked each one meticulously in her mind as she stood before the Sovereign Council, her once prestigious uniform stripped of all insignia. The inquiry had dragged on for months, a public spectacle meant to emphasize the price of betrayal. Commander Nix, began the chief counselor, her voice carrying throughout the vast chamber. You stand accused of negligence resulting in the escape of a high-value prisoner, obstruction of imperial justice, and suspected collaboration with coalition forces. How do you respond to these charges? Lyria's luminescence remained steady, giving away nothing of her inner thoughts. I accept responsibility for the security failure aboard my vessel. As commander, the errors of my crew are ultimately mine. However, I categorically deny any intentional collaboration with enemy forces. Yet the human Ellis Thorne remains at large, countered Admiral Vex, his hostility barely concealed, a dangerous individual responsible for hundreds of Asterian deaths. The evidence regarding Thorne's direct involvement was inconclusive, Lyria stated, repeating what had become her mantra throughout the proceedings. The modification signatures on the weaponized compounds did not match his documented methods. Convenient analysis from someone who allowed unprecedented access to a prisoner, Vex sneered. Before Lyria could respond, the chamber doors burst open. A junior communications officer rushed in, protocol forgotten in his urgency. Sovereign Council, forgive the interruption. Priority communication from the Coalition Diplomatic Corps, marked for immediate attention of this assembly. The chief counselor frowned at the disruption but nodded. Proceed. The officer activated the central holographic display. The face that materialized sent a shock through Lyria's carefully maintained composure. Ellis Thorne, dressed in formal Coalition diplomatic attire. Greetings, Sovereign Council of Asteria, he began, his voice steady and authoritative. I am Ellis Thorne, newly appointed Coalition Special Envoy for Interspecies Medical Cooperation. I transmit this message with the full authority of the Coalition Governing Assembly. Murmurs spread through the chamber as Ellis continued. Recent investigations have confirmed that research conducted at Epsilon Colony was illegally modified by a shadow faction operating within both our governments. Today, we publicly release evidence proving that the biological attack on Deneb 4 was orchestrated not by Coalition leadership, but by war profiteers with investments spanning both our economies. The display split to show documents, molecular analyses, and financial transactions. Among the conspirators, Ellis continued, his gaze briefly meeting Lyria's across impossible distance, was Admiral Vex of the Asterian High Command, whose holdings in synthetic biological alternatives increased fourfold following the attack. Chaos erupted in the chamber. Security personnel moved toward Vex, who shouted denials drowned out by the tumult. Amid the confusion, the chief counselor restored order with a thunderous command. These accusations require immediate investigation, she declared. Admiral Vex will be detained pending verification. This inquiry is suspended. Her four eyes turned to Lyria. Commander Nix, your presence will be required during the investigation. You are confined to the capital until further notice. As the assembly disbanded, Lyria found herself approached by a senior diplomatic aide. Commander Nix, the Coalition envoy has requested a private audience with you as part of the joint investigation. The Council has approved with appropriate monitoring. Hours later, in a sterile diplomatic meeting room, Lyria waited with perfect military posture, despite the tumultuous emotions beneath her surface. When the door finally opened to admit Ellis, it took all her discipline not to move toward him. He looked different, more confident, his bearing shaped by purpose rather than captivity. Yet his eyes held the same warmth when they met hers. Commander, he greeted formally, aware of the monitoring devices. Thank you for agreeing to this consultation. I serve at the Council's direction, she replied with equal formality. Ellis activated a small device that emitted a soft hum. Frequency scrambler, he explained. It won't block their surveillance entirely, but it will give us a moment of privacy. Once activated, he moved closer, lowering his voice. I promised I would find you again. At considerable risk, Lyria observed, though she couldn't prevent her luminescence from brightening in his presence. Your new position seems rather convenient. A smile tugged at his mouth. Amazing what uncovering a cross-species conspiracy will do for one's career prospects. Though I suspect your situation has been less fortunate. Worth the cost, she said simply. Ellis's expression grew serious. The evidence against Vex is irrefutable. His conviction is almost certain, which will vindicate your actions. But that's just the beginning. He hesitated, then continued more urgently. Lyria, the conspiracy went deeper than one admiral. There are factions on both sides that have profited from this war for generations, manipulating our peoples like game pieces. And you believe we can stop them? Lyria asked, practical as always. I believe we must try. Ellis reached for her hand, caution forgotten. The Coalition has authorized me to propose a joint scientific commission, Asterian and human researchers working together on shared challenges. They need a security liaison from your side, someone who understands both worlds. Understanding dawned in Lyria's eyes. You're offering me a position. I'm offering you a purpose, Ellis corrected. A chance to build something rather than destroy. And yes, he added softly, a chance for us to discover what might truly grow in the space between former enemies. The scrambler beeped a warning. Their privacy nearly expired. Lyria made her decision in that instant, years of conditioning giving way to newfound clarity. I will need to request reassignment from the Council, she said. There will be resistance, suspicion. There always is when challenging the established order, Ellis replied. But we've faced worse odds. As the scrambler's effect faded, they stepped apart, resuming their formal postures. But something fundamental had changed. A shared vision taking root between them, fragile yet persistent as the seedlings Ellis had once protected. 6 months later, aboard the joint mission vessel Convergence, Commander Lyria Nix stood beside Scientific Director Ellis Thorne as they watched their diverse crew of Asterians and humans working together. The observation deck offered a spectacular view of the binary star system they orbited, one blue, one golden, locked in eternal dance. The preliminary results from the radiation shield testing exceed expectations, Ellis reported, professional in the presence of others despite the private warmth in his eyes. Your engineering team's modifications to my original design improved efficiency by 30%. A successful collaboration, Lyria noted, her mandibles clicking with subtle satisfaction. As the crew dispersed to their duties, leaving them momentarily alone, Ellis moved closer. Any regrets? He asked quietly. About the path that led us here? Lyria's gaze remained on the binary stars, their light playing across her purple skin. War forged who I was, she said thoughtfully. But peace is shaping who I might become. She turned to him, luminescence brightening. No regrets. Only gratitude for what has grown between worlds. Ellis smiled, reaching out to intertwine his fingers with hers. 5 meeting 5 in a bridge between different forms of life. To think it all began with a poisonous flower and a stubborn alien commander too proud to die. And a human too compassionate to let her, Lyria added, leaning closer. Outside the viewport, the dance of the binary stars continued. Separate bodies moving in harmony, neither diminished by the other's light, together creating something more brilliant than either could alone. In their combined radiance, countless new worlds found the perfect conditions to grow,